Welcome Protege. In the previous tutorials we covered 1D, 2D, and 3D for loops. In this tutorial we're going to continue with our conditional statements and cover if-else statements in greater detail. I'm going to show you a simple if-else statement just so you get the syntax down. Then I'll show you a nested if-else statement, which again, something nested is a conditional statement inside of another conditional statement. And then I'll show you an example where we have multiple arguments for a condition in our if-else statement. I already created the script called if-else statements. I clear and CLC the screen as our first commands. Don't forget your description at the top. And then we have our variable matrix declarations and main body sections. Our first example is going to be the simple if-else statement. I'm going to create a variable x and just set that equal to 8. This number is arbitrary, but I'm going to set it at 8 for now. And if you recall the if-else statement from our overview of conditional statements, the syntax is if, and then you have some condition. In this case, we want to check if x is less than 10. Then we have code that we want to run if this condition is true. In this case, we're just going to have a simple display that says x is less than 10. If this condition is not true, then we would go into our else statement and have another display. Then don't forget to end your if-else statement. To quickly go over what will happen when we reach this section in the code, we first check if x is less than 10. Here we have x equals 8, so we will go into this statement and display x is less than 10. Let's go ahead and run that and make sure we're correct. And yep, x is less than 10. Let's change this to 15 and make sure that we go into our else statement. Run that. And that works. For our next example, I'm going to show you where you're checking more than two conditions, and instead of having if else, you would have to use else if in there as well if you're doing more than two conditions. I'm going to copy the code we just created for the simple example and then build upon that. And for this condition, we're going to check if x is an even number. And to do that, you can do the remainder function, which is rem. The first argument is the dividend, and the next argument is divisor. And we want this to be 2, because if we divide an even number by 2, our remainder will always be 0. And remember, we use two equal signs to check if this is equal to 0. If we go into this condition, then we just want to display x as an even number. I'm going to change this to 16. I'm going to comment this section out first. And to do that, just right click and click the comment, or you can do Control R to comment it. Go ahead and run that. And we get an output of x is an even number. However, notice that we didn't go into this number. And the reason for that is the first condition that is true, we will go inside of that block, and then after it finishes the code inside of your true condition, it will break out of your if-else statement. And that's why we didn't display that x is greater than or equal to 10. For another example, let's change this to 8. And just to reiterate what I just said, our first true condition will be x is less than 10. So we will go inside of this code block and display x is less than 10. It will break out of the loop, so it will not display x is an even number, even though x is an even number. And yep, we only get x is less than 10 here. So you have to be careful with your condition statements. Make sure you keep your priority in mind. For our next example, I'm going to combine two conditions into one expression. And I'm going to combine these two conditions from our previous example, x is less than 10, and our remainder condition. And I like to put each condition inside of its own parentheses so you can read it better. And to have two conditions, you either use double ampersands or you use the sticks for or. In this example, we're going to use double ampersand. And I'll go ahead and type out our second condition and then explain. For us to go inside of this code block and display x is less than 10 and is an even number, both of these conditions must be true. In this case, x must be less than 10 and the remainder has to be 0, meaning that it's an even number. If one of these conditions is not satisfied, then we will not go into this code block and display this string. However, if we just want one of the two conditions satisfied, we would use the pipes. In this case, if x is less than 10 or the remainder of x divided by 2 equals 0, then we will go into this. So again, we only need one condition to be true to be able to go inside of this code block. I'm going to keep it as ampersand. Have an else condition if our first condition is not true, and then display that x is greater than or equal to 10 and is an odd number. Don't forget to add end to terminate your if-else statement. I'm going to comment this section above. Just use Control-R. And let's run this and see what we get as the output. Both of these conditions were satisfied, and we went inside that code block and displayed this string. I'll show you an example with using pipes and change x to 12. So to walk you through that, x is not less than 10, but the remainder of 12 divided by 2 will equal 0, so we will still go inside of this code block and it should display this string. Go ahead and run that to verify. And yep, we still get the output of x is less than 10 and is an even number. And for our final example, I'm going to show you a nested if-else statement. Our first condition is going to be the same, which is x less than 10. Then we're going to have another if condition to check if x is an even number. Then our else condition will display that x is less than 10 and is an odd number. Don't forget to end this if-else statement. This nested if-else statement is complete. Now we have to finish this outer if-else statement. And we have to end our outer if-else statement. To walk you through this example, we have x equals 12. When we check this condition, we will not go inside of here because x is less than 10, and we will go down to this else statement to display x is greater than or equal to 10. And I'll show you another example. So we actually go inside of the first statement. So now x is 8, so we will go inside of this else statement, but then we have another condition that we're checking. And we're checking if x is an even number. So if we go inside of this, then we'll display x is less than 10 and is an even number. But if not, then we would go inside of this and display x is less than 10 and is an odd number. So let's run it and verify. I have to comment out our previous example. And sure enough, we get x is less than 10 and is an even number. So we did go inside of our nested if condition. For a quick recap, we showed you a simple if-else example. This was just to show you the syntax. Then we added more than 2 conditions to show you this else if. And remember that when the first condition is true, it will break out of this else if statement. Then we showed you that you can combine 2 conditions into one expression. In this example, we had 2 conditions that we had to satisfy to be able to go into that code block to display this string. And finally, we showed you a nested if-else statement. So we have this outer if statement, and if that's true, then we go inside of this code block. We have more conditions that we have to check. That's it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe below or leave a question or comment.